So we'll also go through and kind of explain mounting the equipment to the CR7. Since this unit does have the task controller on it, which allows you to do section control, there is a few additional steps that a guy needs to take to get the ISO implement mounted to the machine type that is set up, and then some dimensions and things like that need to be verified. So if you go to your gears tab in the lower left, and we'll go to our machine tab. I've already got a couple of the units set up, but initially you'll go through, you'll set up a new machine, but in this case we're just going to edit ours. You'll select your tractor type, give it a name. You'll come through, measure your antenna height, tell the system if it's in the center of the tractor or not. And then if your GPS source is ahead or behind the rear axle of the machine. You'll also then need to verify your drawbar to axle measurement. These are just generic values, so you'll actually have to measure them if you don't know them. And then from there, the tractor will be set up. After that, you'll have to create the implement. I'll go ahead and edit that. So since we've already got one, we'll go back through and edit ours. Name the implement. Measure your drawbar to axle dimension. And then your axle to this one will remain at 0, as that is not the application point. Once that's done, you'll check out of there, you'll come back. This box will probably be empty, so you'll hit Mount Equipment. In the event we already added it, we'll check out of there, but you'll get a selection that you'll notice is what you set up on the Raven rate control module. You'll select that and mount the equipment to the machine. Once that is complete, you can check out of there. Check out again, and then you're good to go start a job. So here we'll go ahead and we'll enter 1 for our RPM calibration, RPM 1 calibration. Our low RPM limit we're going to set to 800. And we are going to check the box to alarm. Maybe. Our high limit for our RPM, we're going to set that to 1200. And we're also going to set that to alarm. So anytime the RPM reading gets outside of that set range, you will receive an on-screen alarm. Just indicating that the shaft rotation has fallen below or above the set values, just to reference. From there, we'll page over. Our RPM 1 sensor, we want that checked next to product 1. Again, that kind of works back to that safety catch we talked about earlier. So that we will not move the apron belt if the RPM shaft or the PTO shaft is not engaged. It's just kind of a safety check so we don't plug the beaters up. Our valve type will run as PWM closed. The response rate defaults to 50. Control valve deadband defaults to 2. Valve delay remains at 0, and will run with the smart PWM disabled. Coil frequency for this particular PWM cartridge is preferred at 100. Our PWM low limit will probably run around 20 These are user adjustable per system, but this is a pretty good starting point for each. And then we'll put our startup as 25. So we'll enter a generic density factor of 60 initially. If the density of your product is actually known, feel free to enter the correct density factor in there. Our spreader constant for an X700 is 29.6. Our spreader constant for an X900 is 26.3. Those values are listed out in the quick start guide for reference. For this setup, we'll go with a 900 and enter 26.3. Our pulses per revolution is 942. And then our max gate height is 53 inches. A few other things we'll go over here. So once you complete the profile setup, under your UT tab, this will be your main run screen. So we'll kind of touch on all the icons here real quick just to give you a kind of a broad overview of what each button means and what it does. So the tank and bin charge button, so when you first start a load and you open your gate, you can press and hold this bin charge button to take up that space between the gate and the beaters. Think of it as a kind of a quick start feature. There is also a quick start button that'll populate down here on the bottom. You can also utilize that one, but that one will run for 15 seconds once you press it. You can disable it by clicking the master switch off. The main difference between the two, as far as one only runs when you press and hold it, the other one will run for 15 seconds, but the quick start button on the lower right will also add to your product tally, whereas the tank/bin charge button will not do that. So just be aware of that. The other one here you'll see is your density factor reading right here in the center. So we have it set at 60 currently. Once the system is running and starts adjusting the density value for the dynamic cal stuff, you'll notice that value will kind of jump around as the system adjusts. The one right below that you'll see is your gate height reading, and we'll touch on the calibration here shortly. The one below that will have our duty cycle, or our DC, and that's the amount of effort that we're sending to the control valve to move the belt. The RPM 1 readout up here, this will be where you get your PTO shaft speed. If you have a 0 speed there when the PTO is on, check the sensor, make sure that it's close enough to the target, etc., so that you can pick it up. With that assigned to the product 1, we will not run the apron as long as we are not seeing any PTO RPM, so that's an important one. The other thing down here is your miles per hour. If you do press on that, it gives you the option to put in a self-test speed. So at the end of the day, if you want to leave the system in auto, put a self-test speed, and sit at the end of the field and let the apron run just to kind of clean the bed out, that's one way you can do it. You can also set it to manual with a self-test speed, and then increase the duty cycle manually up to 100% and let the apron run to clean it out. We've got our bin level here, and then our section down here. If you touch on that, it'll give you your current tank level reading, your tank capacity, your density factor, and then your spreader constant. And this spreader constant value will change with the gate height monitor as you open and close the gate. Up here you've got your presets that we talked about earlier for your rate. If you want to go back and change those, you can simply touch on the button up there, come in here and then change your preset values, or switch back to a rate bump if you prefer. A couple other things we'll touch on, just so you guys have some transparency on it as to how things kind of work. If we go to our gears tab here and our tools tab at the top, we're going to go down to rate sensor setup. This is where you'll find the values for your clean out setup, your dynamic cal setup, and then your gate height calibration. So for clean out setup, go ahead and press on that. It comes enabled default by default, so you should have a checkbox there, and then your trigger weight defaults to 1,000 and your clean out factor defaults to 15. And really what that means, so once the scale reads 1,000 pounds, we're going to automatically start speeding up the apron to keep the beaters full so that we can keep a consistent spread pattern. On the vertical beater side of things, there's still some variation with the different product types, but typically you want to run that up closer to the 2,500, 3,000 range. It really just kind of depends on the product you have in the box. This also kind of sorts back to the low tank that we talked about too, and setting up a low tank volume and an alarm to tie to it. That way the operator knows when the system is going into clean out mode. When in clean out mode, you'll see that duty cycle that we talked about on the home screen there. You'll see that constantly creep up. You may also see some rate fluctuations on your target rate once we're in clean out mode. So again, just giving that low tank alarm just to let the user know that, hey, we're in clean out mode, may alleviate some of those initial concerns if they view them on the screen. So from there, we'll go down to our dynamic cal setup. So we usually recommend about 1/20th of the load, so that typically equates out to that 2,000, 2,500 range as well. What that does is, so at 1,000 pounds as we have it set here right now, every 1,000 pounds that the scale decrements, we'll go back and kind of look at what we said we put on through our rate controller. If there's a discrepancy between the two, the dynamic cal feature will adjust the product density to smooth that out and make sure that we're applying what we say we're applying. The sensitivity value down there, if it's a really large swing that the system determines it needs to adjust, with a sensitivity setting of 50, we'll only make one adjustment, or we'll only make half of the adjustment in that one time that the system thinks it needs to change. You can adjust those values up and down a little bit. I just recommend not getting too far away from 50, because if there are large swings, you can see some erratic rate behavior. One other thing you'll have to do too, for the gate height sensor, we'll have to do an initial calibration. Again, this should come from the factory already done, but if for some reason things get reset and you have to go back through it, go into your gate height cal. In the drop down, you'll choose custom, and then we'll go to our procedural calibration. Pretty straightforward on how we step you through this. Essentially, you're gonna you'll have your max gate height setting in there. You'll lower the gate, or excuse me, yep, you'll lower the gate all the way and zero it out, and then you'll simply raise the gate and then set your max. From there, the gate calibration is complete. You can check out of there and return to the home screen. That's after it's calibrated and while you're running the gate up and down from there, you'll see it update in real time in that middle widget there. So another thing we want to touch on here too is the master switch and how that all plays in with the system. So we've got our physical foot switch that is our master switch, but we also have this on-screen button that we need to enable prior to being able to apply product. So whenever you turn that guy on, think of it as the system is armed. Once you start receiving speed, or if you have a self-test speed in there, we will not start moving the belt until we have the RPM feedback we need. If gate height is enabled, you also need to have the gate open more than, I think it's 3 inches.